Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Welcome, everybody, to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I am Patrick Norris, and I'm so excited today to have my friends Rick Presley and Dr. Todd Bowman. These guys are not only friends, but they are complete bosses in the house when it comes to all things therapy, human behavior, and so on. Today, what we want to talk about is in the culture, there are these extremes, those polarized opposites. The tension is high. Things from politics to racial tension to things around sexuality and gender, things that are even related to what we believe about God, and a whole segment within Christianity that are doing this thing called deconstruction, which can be a good thing if a person is asking good questions to discover the roots of their faith. And I didn't just adopt mom and dad's brand, but I've actually come into my own understanding and I've got my own fixed foundation. However, what can begin happening is that people in what they believe, they can feel the opposition of another belief and feel hurt and feel like somehow or other their belief is being diminished, unseen, and for them, they will often project back to the other belief that the other belief is hurting them. And so I want to kind of wrestle through this. Part of the reason is when we were in our trainings with the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals, we discovered this thing, or at least I did, called a drama triangle. And in the drama triangle, if you are living enmeshed, other people's emotions, other people's beliefs, now then are affecting your sense of self, your sense of emotions, that you're going to live in rage, you're going to live in anxiety and depression until you differentiate and until you build a boundary. And so I'm just thinking of the emotional, mental side and how you stay healthy as a pastor, because there's people in the congregation who will consistently want you to shift your beliefs or shift how you see something or shift your morality or your ethic so that they can feel okay about themselves. And what we're wanting to do is say, how do you hold on to yourself as a pastor, as a leader, as a Christian, when in fact other people are saying that it's hurting me? So first of all, guys, thank y'all for being a part of the Red Ink Revival Podcast. So you guys doing good?
Doing well, glad to be here.
Love it.
Me
love
too.
it. Love it, love it. Well, what are we going to do with this stuff, man? Either one of you want to jump in and let's just see how to swim among the sharks?
Yeah, the first place my mind goes is this idea developmentally of separation and individuation. It's a very healthy process of learning how to be distinct from the other. So think about a kid who's growing up, right, a toddler, where there's such reliance on the other for nurture, for safety, for comfort, like total dependence, right? Especially in those infant years.
Yeah.
And over time, with autonomy, with mobility, there comes this process of separation and individuation. And even that, I think that construct gets overlooked because it involves the word individuation, and there's such a movement afoot to squelch individualism, to abdicate one's own sense of autonomy, one's sense of personhood, toward conformity for the whole, which we kind of see developmentally, right? Like we see the separation, individuation, we call that differentiation. And then through adolescence, we see like, okay, now there's some groupthink, now we have to fit in with peers, now we need to make sure we're okay.
Yeah.
Right, but again, part of that is this transition in even attachment bonds, where we're moving from parents are exclusively capable and responsible for that, and toward my peers do that, which is really preparatory, right? That's not the end point for attachment. That's this preparatory transition for how do I, in that intermingling, in that kind of diffusing my attachment bonds to my peers, so that I can find someone, a partner, who then kind of takes on that role of primary attachment figure in our life. So there's this separation, individuation, kind of a rejoining developmentally, but out of that rejoining, then we deepen that sense of bond. We become moms and dads, we build a marriage relationship, we have kids, and the cycle continues. Something's happening, and I don't know if you see it in your practice, Rick, something's happening where culture's getting stuck in that adolescent progression. And we need the approval of others, we need the affections and the affirmations of others, and we're afraid to move it. We might behaviorally and relationally bond and start a family, but emotionally, I think by and large as a culture, we're stuck in that space where we need approval. I see it among pastors as well, so it's not just like outside the church. But there's something in our narrative culturally where we're getting stuck, and we could look at helicopter parents and snowplow parents and minesweeper parents and every other kind of parent that's out there. I mean, that's part of it, but whatever is happening developmentally, we're getting stuck in that space of inability to differentiate. And then all of a sudden the expectations, the demands, the words that others have leave us incapable of having our own opinion, of saying something hard. And how do you see this, Rick, with really emotions become the primary place where we crumble, right? We give ourselves up this, like, I have my beliefs, I have my thoughts, but as soon as emotion gets activated, right, there's this need to join, to be empathic, to be compassionate. We've talked some about empathy, so I want to get back to like maybe even some of the reaction to empathy in the church being, if that's the thing being leveraged in the world and that's where folks are capitulating and losing their beliefs, like I can maybe make sense of that movement differently. But Rick, for you as a therapist, how do you see emotion being that place where people get drawn in and capitulate their sense of self, their identity in the modern world?
Yeah, I think for me, this idea of differentiation is my working model of therapy. This is where I stand on this and believe it and see it and understand it. And what I tell clients a lot of times is the evidence of their emotional maturity. One of the evidences of their emotional maturity is in an evidence of being differentiated is being able to tolerate the tension that gets created in the middle. Like the middle for me is that place of saying I can I'm not on the extreme of being directed by others, that their emotions, their beliefs, their everything is I'm dependent on them. I'm dependent on them. But on the other side of being so individualized that you don't ever take feedback from others, and you're your own self, but being able to hold on to yourself and respond to others' emotions, and my own emotions, and say that's the evidence of that. And we're losing that capacity as a society. We see it so plainly in politics. Where's the middle? There is no more middle. And without finding a way back to the middle, I don't know there's a way out of our current situation, because we're just going to get more and more polarized. But there's a tension that gets created there. There's a tension between my truth and your truth. And a sign of differentiation and emotional intelligence is being able to be okay with your truth and my truth, and not one of us have to be more right than the other. And we see that play out in marriages all the time, day after day after day, as they get into these arguments where both of them come with very legitimate perspectives on this thing that happened yesterday in their home. He felt this way, she felt this way, he responded this. They're totally legitimate, but one of them has to be more right than the other. And that just creates this defensive, toxic environment where both of them are just defending their position, and they cannot find this place to say, your position is right, but so is mine. That's a very complex tension that gets created that a lot of people don't know how to deal with.
Hey everybody, I want to slide right in here and thank you for joining us for today's episode. Let me ask you for a huge favor. If this podcast is providing value to you, would you consider subscribing to it wherever you get your podcasts? Also, if you feel that it would be valuable to somebody else, please like it, comment on it, and share it on your social media feeds like YouTube, Facebook, or wherever you populate networking. And one more big favor. If you like the show, please go review it. And if it's true for you, give us 5 stars. And when you review it and rate it, it gives our efforts greater opportunity to grow, and that would mean the world to us. Now let's go back to this week's episode. I think about the George Whitefield, John Wesley tension and how they struggled with each other. Wasn't even sure each other were saved in the early days. But then as they got older, they gravitated closer to the middle and then honored each other in their disagreements. I find that today there are so many nuances. When you say your truth and my truth, now we understand that God's truth is the truth. However, there is an interpretation of that truth.
Yeah.
And so I might interpret that differently than you interpret that. So I think about this issue of the culture being bipolar, and then I think about how much of an impact that has to have on marriages. If the culture and the media and social media and most of our relationships are on these two extremes, how in the world can even a marriage?
Yeah.
I mean, the divorce rates have to continue to be going up simply because husbands and wives are already pre-coded or they're already pre-programmed as they get into marriage that there are these complete absolutes and let's don't move into the middle. Now again, I personally am a big-time inerrantist. I believe that the Bible is the inspired authority word of God, but I don't believe all interpretations are. And so I again look at that, and I love, Rick, the word differentiation, which you were the first kind of flag waver of that word that required of me that I'm going to have to do a lot of digging into it. This is pre-certification of some of the stuff that we've done since. But that is something that's profoundly important. I think about Dan Siegel, who is one of the leading attachment guys. And attachment, for everybody who's listening, is really about how relationships began to be bonded together through the neurobiology of two people. And the brain then builds and galvanizes neural pathways for connection. But he says, Dr. Dan Siegel, he says there's two things that are more important than anything for mental health. And it's being attunement, and then differentiation, attunement and differentiation. And so for anybody listening, what that means is if you can build your foundation, the emotional foundation of your life, with what attunement is and what differentiation is, then you're going to be able to live healthy with people who even disagree with you. If you don't, you're going to wind up being the guy in front of your social media feed thinking, nobody liked this, I must be crap. There's nothing about me that leads well, I don't think well, I don't post any good stuff. And again, it's an issue where the world defines you, that other people's emotions and beliefs define you. So as we begin to pull these ideas apart, what would be some more, maybe some examples of the way that our culture is getting on the extremes? What are some things that even in pastoral work where we are confronted with, oh snap, I didn't realize that because I believe something or preach something, it's making you feel. I've even had people in my case who, when I'm going through a series, will say, because you believe this, I no longer feel safe in our church. And that's interesting to me because it wasn't taught or preached with a whip. It wasn't something that was a caustic. It was something that was challenging ideas. And because that challenge is there, a person says, I no longer feel safe. And then I think, gosh, this can't be just connected to your present. This has to be a wound profile throughout your life that now then emotionally you feel unsafe when you're disagreed with. Do you guys have other examples that you maybe can pull up?
Yeah, two come to mind, kind of two spaces where I think that emerged from. One would be the parenting process. I mean, I can't tell you how exhausting it is to parent kids these days. It's probably always been that way. But that space of helping move, I've raised 3 boys. I'm raising 3 boys, 13, 11, and 7, and the hard work of helping them reorient to perspective outside themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's daily. He did this, and like now I need you to get him in trouble because of. I'm like, well, there's nothing in what he did. Like, you disagree with each other,
Yeah.
right? Like, it probably wasn't the kindest thing to do, but you both did it, and I'm not gonna like side with one of you,
Right.
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
at this point, guys, I'm like, when is the lesson gonna be learned?
Yeah.
But I've had to flip my thinking and say, I'm offsetting in the home a lesson that's being modeled and exemplified somewhere in culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
We do soccer, we do church, we do our small group from church, and we do school. And I can promise you, at soccer, at church, and at small group / youth group at church, like the lesson's not being learned there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So it speaks to what is this environment that our kids spend so much of the developmental progression
Yeah.
in, the schooling environment. So what are these cultural norms? Back to this kind of bimodal distribution, right? Like two hard extremes that we're seeing culturally. And what our kids, Dan Siegel talks a lot about, not just the things that are explicitly taught,
Yep.
but what are kids catching? What's the caught nature? Things they're picking up on quietly, things
Yeah.
that we don't even know. They're sponges.
Yeah.
And then the parenting relationship, the family environment becomes the place where maybe all the things that they're onboarding are needing to be vetted and worked out, and like how well is this going to play, right? Like the family environment is the stage on which that's going to be enacted. So I find myself doing a lot of work, and I'm thinking like, man alive, like what are these messages kids are getting? And if we're not as parents doing that work,
Yeah.
which you and I have done this enough as a podcast to know, like I draw a lot of church dynamic from family dynamic.
Yeah.
As a pastor, I can't imagine the dimensionality. You mentioned husbands and wives and the difficulty of building marriage, and you've kind of cited some examples, Rick. I mean, that's two people.
Yeah.
Like trying to walk out relationship in a way that we stay connected, we stay attuned, we stay responsive, we stay engaged, which is difficult.
Yeah.
And then to add the dimensionality of 300, 400 individuals, whereas a pastor, you're trying to walk out relationship. I mean, it almost sets you up for failure.
Yeah.
Right? In our modern context, it's impossible for you to stand, that's what we're talking about, to stand as a differentiated leader, to speak truth from that perspective, and to not have someone. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And if as a pastor, you're working hard to make sure there's not that moment,
Yeah.
like I think the capitulation of self, like you're no longer differentiated if you're tiptoeing around. No, I'm not talking about like, here's some things to consider, but like those fundamentals of the faith.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that's what we're starting to see ebb and wane.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the interesting. And if I'm honest, that's kind of a scary thing as I'm raising boys. Like, what kind of church are they going to inhabit when they're my age or your age?
Yeah. Right. Which will be interesting for sure. And I know as being a dad of two 20-somethings, I think sometimes I want to control the kind of spiritual future and church future that they're going to have. And then I realized, wait a minute, the gospel has survived every generation prior.
Yeah.
And so if we elevate the gospel and have some essentials to our faith and teach it well and debate it well and think through it well, then somehow or other they're going to emerge. But those things, I mean, they are in front of all of this. Rick, do you have any kind of example?
You just brought up that issue with your kids, and I've been there and experienced the same thing where my kids are making choices in their life that I would prefer them not to make.
Yeah.
And in some ways they would go against everything they've ever been taught, emotionally, sociologically, spiritually, everything. And that tension that I feel of like wanting to correct them, and now as an adult, they're like, 23 and 21, like what power do I have to correct them?
Yeah, for real.
But I want to. And I have to let them journey that out and trust that the way we've taught them, their belief that, the whole scripture there of train your child in the way they should go and they will not depart from it, that they'll eventually return back to some version of that resonates and is congruent with them as a person, congruent with them in their faith. and just guide them in that space. But man, you just so want to jump all over their behaviors and tell them, no, you can't do that. You shouldn't be doing that. Or what are you thinking? Or, we taught you better than that. And it's like, well, I hope I did teach them better than that. And they've also got to learn for themselves.
Yeah.
And my own level of differentiation is exposed in that moment by how well I handle that.
That's so good, man.
Because if I jump all over them, I'm now needing them to be something so that I feel okay about myself. But if I don't offer any guidance, then I'm kind of giving up on myself as well.
Yeah.
I'm kind of letting go of what I believe and who I am and not offering that as a resource for my kids.
And I think you just hit the primary cultural issue. I need the other to be something specific so that I can be okay about myself.
Yep.
And I think that's what we face as the church.
Yeah.
Is people come and say, like, I need you to accept me. I need you to capitulate your beliefs, care for me, tell me I'm okay so I can be okay about myself.
Yeah.
And then there's the tension, right? Like there's that here's these principles of the faith that are uncompromising over the millennia.
Yeah.
Right? That all of a sudden, like, do I let emotion override like what I know that I believe? And finding that tension that you talked about earlier, Rick, how do I show and express the love for our kid when they're making choices like, that's incongruent, and I love you, and I trust you, and I'm going to keep walking out life alongside you.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the threads of that fabric are being not just like pulled, like they're being torn right now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think that's where the church has an opportunity to stand in and model that, like, here's what we believe, and we love you.
Yeah, both.
And we desire the good for you, and there's a better way for you, but we're not going to force you. We're not going to make that choice for you.
Yeah. And we're not going to back off.
We're not going to back off. Yeah. I find it so unbelievably rich that so many of those who are antagonistic toward the church and antagonistic toward the faith live in these parenting modalities that are all about control. It's just implicit.
Yep.
I'm a snowplow parent. I'm going to go out in front of you and make sure that your life has no challenges.
Yeah.
I'm a helicopter parent. I'm always going to be there so that you only think and do what I want to do. So there's this accusation that the church, and don't get me wrong, there's plenty of helicopter snowplow minesweeper parents in the church.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? But it's fascinating to me when someone outside of that embodies the same way of being that they find so offensive in the church. They just call it something different.
Yeah.
Well, my sister is an educator down in Wichita, and she was saying the same thing last weekend about how so many parents report such harmful and possibly even abusive situations that they themselves grew up in school. And now they respond to that with this helicopter, just intense parenting style of how they're going to parent their own children in the school system, and it's completely cut off any authority that the teachers can have in the classroom, because we're not, again, finding that middle space of where the teacher needs to have some authority, and the teacher needs to be able to correct, and the teacher needs to be able to guide and keep a control over their classroom. And sometimes little Johnny misbehaves and he needs to be corrected by that.
Yeah.
And if your sensitivity to your own experience is so intense, you say, well, nobody's going to discipline my child, or nobody's going to call out my child because that happened to me, and I know that, it's, so it's pervasive throughout our culture.
Let me jump in again and tell you about two amazing opportunities for pastors, spouses, and senior leaders of ministry that will increase your leadership. And they're both free. I'm talking about monthly Zooms and also weekly process groups. First, we hold a monthly Zoom event that is 1+ hours with Dr. Todd Bowman, a psychologist and human behavior expert, and me. We usually have around 15 to 30 other participating pastors, spouses, and leaders. The monthlies have been amazing to help pastors collaborate around tactics, personnel challenges, and even how to navigate our own inner world. The skills you'll learn and a newfound pastoral community will expand your leadership mapping with everybody you lead. These monthly Zooms happen every month on the second Mondays at 6 p.m. Central Time. And then the second opportunity for pastors and spouses is our weekly process group that spans for 6 weeks. In our weekly process group, we provide tools that guide you into your story and help you rediscover you, redefine leadership, redeem life, and redream ministry. Weekly process groups give time to open your stories as you collect the dots, connect the dots, and correct the dots. Attunement begins with you making sense of your story. When you live with mindful attunement to your story, you'll find that the people you lead will begin to also make leadership sense to you in profound new ways. Our alumni tell us that this is one of the most impactful experiences they have ever had. We place ladies in groups of 6 to 10, and also we put men in groups of 6 to 10. The value of the weekly experience is $900+ per person. However, in this season, we're offering it to you for free. You can see some of our alumni sharing stories on our events web pages. You can find out everything you need to know to get involved in either the monthlies or the weekly process groups by going to redinkrevival.com. I hope to see you there soon.
It's the refusal to recognize the good that is in authority. Mm-hmm. That there is value of having authority in our lives. Yes, authority has been abused. Authority got abused in our childhood, often, in different scenarios. It's been abused in the church. It's been abused in the police. There are some police that have abused. Sure. In every place there is authority, except for God, there has been abuse. Mm-hmm. Even in the kingdom of God with people. As long as people are involved, there will be authority abuse. So what the other extreme then becomes is I can't tolerate correction. And correction requires there to be a standard, requires there to be an authority, requires there to be something that is agreeable. And once you take that away and there's no more room for correction, all of a sudden you lose the value of authority, and you actually lose a purification component that's designed to actually do a cleansing work in you. Back to the kid's story with when they do and believe and go in directions that we didn't teach them and that kind of thing. One of the things years ago Tina said to me, and of course the kids were high school age, so we're not talking little kids, but they were high school age. And I was dealing with some anxiety about where they are headed. My imagination began to move forward, and I exaggerated, and I'm, what ifs and all that kind of thing. And I'm talking to Tina, and I'm saying, I'm dealing with this anxiety. And her response was, she said, well, you need to remember that they are writing their story. It's not your story. You may be a character somewhere in their story, but it's theirs, which is another metaphor for differentiation.
For sure.
And allow them to have a chapter that goes places that you're like, what's going to happen? The tension's rising. Allow them to have a life that they're, discovering and figuring out, and trust that the Holy Spirit is going to continue to grab them, and that we're going to continue to pray over them, and that they'll stand before the Lord and one day hear, well done, you good and faithful servant. So I think about the importance again of this differentiation. And one of the things in pastoral work is today job descriptions are just so blurred. What's the pastor's job description? So, because there are these controlling churches that, Rick, you talk about that your, Christian religious church background felt very legalistic. There were things that you couldn't hardly breathe in, and it actually impacted you and really contributed to your inner world for ultimately addiction and acting out. And so we definitely want to recognize that there are a bunch of jacked up things going on in churches. And some of the people today who are on social media with very loud voices in the anti of traditional Christianity, they come from a lot of pain. They come from a lot of legitimate, trauma. However, it's interesting that in those spaces, again, there's now a new projection on what a pastor's supposed to be. So one of the phrases of, the newer evangelical, or really they call themselves sometimes exvangelical, and pastors who might be listening, this isn't just a small little deal. This is an entire movement going on. And so even if you feel like, well, that doesn't touch me, it's touching you. You just your skin's not that sensitive to it, but it's there.
Yeah.
And if you have kids, I promise you, your kids are being confronted with this stuff.
Yeah.
They're just not talking to you about it.
Well, and every client that I think I have that comes from a situation like that where they're asking these questions, they're asking all the same questions as someone who's doing a podcast or whatever on deconstruction. They just haven't found the podcast yet.
Yeah.
We're all asking those questions,
And asking the questions, it's good.
Right.
We should ask the questions. The issue is how we're going about it. It's like J.P. Moreland says, the top 30 philosopher, influencer of our world today. He's also an apologist and a theologian, and he says that anytime you have an issue around skepticism, things about God, anytime you do, it's going to be for one of two reasons. He said, if it is rational, logical reasoning, you should be able to sit down and write out in a couple of sentences exactly what your problem is. If you can't write it out, you know that it's emotional and it's based in your wounds. It's based in that's what he says. And the three of us believe that that's very elementary. However, whenever we as pastors are working with people, we need to realize we're not actually just throwing data at them and fixing it. That we're looking at people who've got these bleeding wounds, and out of it, they're trying to make meaning of it. So again, one of the new job description things that I hear is that, pastors need to do better. And so there are these different definitions. And I, as a pastor, begin to feel the weight of that. It feels like I'm not being understood. Y'all have no idea what I'm trying to accomplish here. And one of the things the do better would be around that pastors need to lean into folks who disagree with them in the church. They need to lean in. So if somebody's in a process of curiosity, and they're discovering the answers to these issues, that a pastor needs to lean in and walk it out with them. And it's like, that is so romantic and so impractical, because a pastor, we understand that a pastor wears about 15 hats. A pastor is supposed to be the CEO of the organization. The pastor is supposed to be a counselor. The pastor's supposed to be the teacher and preacher, and you can't just come up to the pulpit on Sunday morning and give some half-baked, half-cooked, microwaved message. You got to hit a home run every week. And then you're supposed to be in every single person's life. These issues that people struggle with are issues that aren't one conversation. Yeah. They literally could take months of regular check-in. Well, if you have 100 people in your church, and let's say you have 10 of them that are struggling, you don't have anything else to do in your week. So the culture now is presenting that pastors have got to do better about something that can't happen. And a pastor can begin, and 70% of pastors struggle with depression. And now we know why. Yep. Because no matter what you do, if you're not differentiated, you can begin to feel like, I can't measure up. One more thing that I think is an interesting one that I don't want to forget is this idea that pastors need to do better with not burning out their serving squads, their teams of people who are serving. Don't burn them out. And what this is profoundly back to differentiation. It isn't the pastor's job to micromanage someone else's emotional states. I have no idea what your time capacities are, what your energy capacities are, and sometimes what'll happen is people are living in absolute chaos at home.
Yeah.
They are horrible at time management and priority management and energy management in their everyday life. And then they overcommit themselves in everything they're doing. And the first thing they cut is church serving, which biblically, I believe that if you will put the kingdom of God first, that doesn't mean that you have to spend 40 hours there. And I'm not talking about hurting somebody. I'm talking about heart worship. That if a person will do that and get a coach beside them to help them figure out the chaos in the rest of their life, they can begin to regulate back to a healthy self. But what happens is, and this, I've had staff, I've had secretaries, I've had various individuals that have, served close with me, and I'm telling them on a regular basis, be careful as to how you're managing your soul. Sometimes I would have staff it was a regular where I would have staff give me their hourly investments. And so I'm not looking for what they're doing each hour. I'm just looking each day, what are your hours, so that in the end of the week, I want to know what are you doing in your week. And it's to protect them. It is to keep them from, if they're working more than 50 hours a week on a regular basis, that's the definition of workaholism, and I want to know why. I want to know how your marriage is. I want to know what's going on in your life. What I find is that people will, even in ministry, overcommit, and then they get burned out, and then they begin to resent you. Tina and I have been befuddled by it, that we have gotten people who resented us when we're trying to protect them, but they have no capacity to protect themselves.
How would you like to reboot your personal finances this year? How would you like to take control of your money, turning small wins into big results? I want to encourage you to check out my wife Tina's financial coaching business at tinanorris.org. You might be wondering, what is a financial coach? A coach is someone who will personally team up with you to outline financial goals, inspire you with energy, help you stay focused on your goals, and so much more. You can do it all through Zoom, and she provides a free initial consultation, so there's no pain or cost to you for your first steps. Maybe you've been to several Financial Peace University cycles, left with great intentions, but struggled to execute. You need a trainer, a coach, another human that won't shame or judge you to help you stay on track. Tina is a certified expert that will help you with clarifying financial dreams, understanding spending patterns, reviewing all financial obligations, assessing financial and insurance needs, defining a spending plan, understanding your emotional profile related to money, building margin for savings and emergency funds, learning strategies for attacking debt, and referring recommended financial advisors to multiply your tomorrow. And she isn't selling any products, policies, or investments. She is the ultimate financial teammate. As Tina's husband of 30 years, I can tell you firsthand how much of a difference Tina's skills and giftings have made. Our financial portfolio wouldn't be a fraction of what it is today if it wasn't for her. She works with clients that are single parents, everyday people, pastors and church staff, as well as high-income professionals. I've known executives of Fortune 500 companies that manage billion-dollar budgets at work, but then come home to complete financial disorder and disappointments. Shame roars at them as they face the stresses of marriage, kids, and struggling retirement plans. A personal trainer can change the way you think, emote, and behave. If you have friends, church members, clients, or even young marrieds that are launching their financial lives, you will do them all a favor to have them check out this amazing option. If professional athletes need a coach to win the day to fulfill their dreams, then you and I do too. And you won't find anybody better to help you get there than Tina Norris. Set up your free consultation from anywhere in the world today. Go to tinanorris.org to find out all the details.
So let's talk about that. First, let's talk about it from the pastoral side. How does a pastor leader manage their own emotional sense of self when they have this kind of not just one or two people? If a pastor has an elder board or an authority board over them that is somehow or other projecting that on them, now their finances are tied to it, their sense of the future, what's going on with my kids, where what are the stresses in my marriage, all because of this thing. What would you say to pastors who, are finding themselves in that space?
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of asking that question and tying it to this idea of differentiation. That for me, differentiation is this place of coming to real, rigorous honesty about who I am, what I like, what I don't like, what I prefer, what I don't prefer, who I'm going to be, who I'm not going to be, and being committed to that. And not letting your definition of self, your identity, be violated by this thing or this person or this whatever. And let's bring it back to marriages for a minute. Like, a person could be in an unhealthy, undifferentiated place with a spouse, that they're dependent on that spouse for their own well-being, for their own definition, for their own sense of self. But they could also be undifferentiated with the concept of marriage. That this title of married, this title of husband or title of wife is so important to me that it blurs my ability to be myself. Yeah. And so if you have so bringing that back to pastors, if you have a pastor who is married to the church, like that specific church, and he can't see himself outside of that church, if he can't see himself being successful and being okay and being well outside of that local organization, then he's going to become dependent upon them for his identity. Yeah. So the elder board or the other staff or that one person that has a really loud voice in the church is going to poke at his emotional self and his emotional well-being, and he's going to be constantly molding and shaping and putting this mask on, like painting this mask that's constantly changing based on who he's with, so that person's happy. So when they're happy, then I feel okay, I feel safe. So he could be married and undifferentiated to that specific church, but he could also be undifferentiated to the role and the title of pastor.
So good.
Like if that is if that's my definition of self, is to hold this title of pastor, then whatever it takes to hold that job and whatever it takes to hold that position that gives me that title can put him in that same undifferentiated, unhealthy place of like selling my soul to this idea, to this organization, giving them all I've got and more, with no boundaries, with no sense of self, with no ability to say, hey, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. I'm not going to participate in that thing. I'm not going to be that to you. I'm not going to come to every single hospital visitation 3 times a day. Yeah. Like, I'm not doing it. Yeah. But they can't do that because they're married to, they're so overly committed to either the church or the title that they give themselves up.
Which is the breeding ground for depression.
Absolutely.
Anxiety, rage, resentment, all of that. Yep. Because it's the breeding ground, we as pastors, we're kind of the professional Christian. We as pastors are kind of, the spear of, modeling Christianity. And so what we do is we react to that depression with these spiritual solutions. Mm-hmm. In Jesus' name, I take authority over the devil. I take authority over depression, or God, I just pray for the joy of the Lord. And what we're doing is we're doing these spiritual exercises that can give you an immediate hit of dopamine and a sense of God's presence and goodness. But if you don't differentiate and work on these foundational structures, you're never going to live free. And again, that's why you have these tip of the spear leaders that are modeling Christianity, and yet they're modeling it in a way where it's all minimizing the power of differentiation. And so biblically, I just want to clarify this. Biblically, when we say differentiation, what we're talking about is the Bible's teaching on free moral agency. We're talking about you have a choice and you'll be held responsible and get the benefit of that which you choose. So everything comes back. In free moral agency, God's not going to be enmeshed with you. He's not going to control you. He'll let you write your own story. But at the same time, he's going to continually be a friend,
so beautiful.
An encouragement, admonishing us. And so I think that, again, it's so important that when we talk about differentiation in this context, it is not something that we're just psychobabbling on. This is critical. And, some people are like, I hear folks say, well, I just believe you just stick with the Bible. You don't need to be thinking about all these other things. It's like, all we're doing is using better language, more full language to help you understand what the Bible has taught for centuries. And if we just did what the Bible taught, we would not be in the mess that we're in around this stuff. So, back, Todd, to the idea of pastors and their roles and trying to figure out how, because the tentacle, there's so many webs that are born around this stuff. If like what Rick says, which I absolutely agree, love, but the instinct in a pastor can be, well, I don't need to identify with it. I need to have a future that I see, that I don't have to have this job in this place. But you know how the double bind works, and the brain begins to imagine, well, wait a minute. When I went to Bible college, I went all in. I went into ministry all in. And that means that at the end of Bible college, I don't have a degree in business. And I began to experience my gift giving me income dimensions that I'm not going to get if I go and work at McDonald's or Quick Trip or mowing lawns. So my wife and kids, they grow up with a standard, and all of a sudden, I don't feel like it's a double bind. I don't feel like I have any negotiation room here. And so I abdicate my sense of self, which predisposes me to depression, rage, and anxiety. And I don't know what to do about that. So I'm pastor, that guy. Help me, Todd. What am I going to do?
Yeah, I think it gets back to, like how much of that is expected by boards, leaders over you as a pastor, how much of that is kind of bottom up, and there's this kind of double bind of middle management in some regards, right? Like as a senior pastor, like there's bottom up pressure and top down pressure, and probably parallel pressure as well.
Yeah, that's right.
From other churches and what's happening out here and whose church is growing and what's blowing up, and like there's just pressure on every side, which speaks to, I think, right, like where we see differentiation start to fade. Like if somebody else is doing something, and it gets, I don't know, like part of what's been bounced around my head is really this is rooted in bad theology, or at least bad exegetical work. Well, Paul became all things to all people. But Paul didn't abdicate his sense of self. Like he continues to tell his own story.
Yeah, that's right.
He doesn't lose himself in becoming all things to all people, but like that's the modern expectation. And if that's implanted in the pastoral imagination, you're going to be doing what people want at the board level. You're going to be doing what people want bottom up from the parishioners. What's happening over at the other church? What are they doing this work in? And then everything is about how do I conform? How do I conform? Which is the same emptiness, right? Like, who are you called to be? What is the distinct vision you've been given as a pastor? How do you walk that out faithfully? And not have it be reactive to every kind of gentle blowing of the breeze in someone's emotional experience as a board member, as a parishioner, or that somebody found temporary success starting a new program. Right? But to say, how do we stay the course? How does our sense of self get carried into an understood future? Right? That we believe God is already present in. But like, how do we do the work of staying faithful to who He's created us to be, the truth that He's given to us, and make the choice on a daily basis to live in that reality, and to not deviate, to not compromise, right? Well, it's just amazing to me, these pastors who will rigidly cling to their belief systems about what is true in Scripture, and be completely flaccid in their understanding of sense of self. There's probably personality disorder characteristics, if not a full-blown personality disorder.
Yeah.
And they're rigidly rooted in their faith, but it doesn't translate into like who they are as a person.
I think about Dayton Moore when you say some of what you just said there. Dayton Moore, the GM for the Kansas City Royals, said, "I would rather be persecuted for who I am than praised for who I'm not."
Yeah.
And so it's not just a pastoral thing.
Absolutely.
Even GMs in baseball.
It's a leadership thing.
It's a leadership thing. Yeah. And you have authority over you, have authority under you, or people under your authority, and then you have your peers.
It's at every life stage. I mean,
in every life stage.
We could teach 5-year-olds this idea of learning how to handle that tension that, well, I want to be different than mom.
Yeah.
Well, developmentally at life stage at 5 years old, what does that look like?
Yeah.
I oftentimes have the same conversation with 21, 22-year-olds who can't seem to break away from mom and dad. Mom and dad have too much pressure on them. And it's like, well, what does this look like? It's at every stage, every area, every step of life is impacted by our ability to hang on to our sense of self, understand who we are, and live that out in a healthy, balanced way.
Hey, I want to invite you, if you are listening and thinking, I have so many questions I would like to ask. We would love to address your questions on an upcoming episode. In fact, we may do an entire episode on the one question that you have. If you will simply email us at redinkrevival@gmail.com. We will catalog all of these questions, and we would love to be able to address the things on your heart and on your mind. So be sure to get in touch with us, and we'll take the journey together.
Talk a little bit about double binds. And, what do you do when you have, I don't like either option. I want to differentiate, and I want to create a boundary. But a boundary requires there to be consequences that are not retribution or revenge, but they're just, for me to love you well, I've got to have consequences that if you act and do certain things. Well, those consequences, then I pay the price for that as well, as the one setting the boundary. And then my kids do, or the church does, and et cetera.
Yeah.
So what do you do if you have a double bind where you have two options and you're like, I don't like either one of those?
That's exactly the problem with the double bind.
Yeah.
Like people say, well, I don't have an option. I don't have a choice. It's like, well, absolutely you have a choice.
Yeah.
You just don't like your choices.
Yes.
And because you want this, and whatever it is that you think you want isn't available to you, because you're not master of the universe.
Yeah.
And you've got to learn how to deal with other people and other situations. But a double bind is essentially this kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. When I'm teaching it to guys in group, you have to use very specific language to say, well, the negative if I do this will be, the negative outcome if I do this will be blank. And the negative outcome if I don't do this will be blank. And there you find the double bind. Because if I do this or if I don't do this, both ways are probably going to give me a negative outcome. Now you could switch it and do the positive. The positive outcome if I do it will be blank. Positive outcome if I don't do it will be blank, and see it from that perspective. But so either way, but you gotta use that very specific language of the negative if I do, the negative if I don't, and it begins to expose this kind of double bind of like, well, both of these options suck.
Yeah.
I don't like either one of them. But so oftentimes the better choice is the harder of those two.
Yeah.
Is the one that you react to more, the one that you're more resistant to doing.
Interesting.
Because it's going to take more work. It's going to take more effort.
And I would say right now, the difficulty level in that is the harder thing is what is really congruent with my understanding of self.
Yeah.
Rather than, am I capitulating? Am I just giving up my voice? And the bind, because I think part of that equation is, who do I understand myself to be?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how am I showing up in the choice versus, here this choice has come to me, am I just looking to mitigate the impact? Am I trying to hedge my bets? And if I choose this, there'll be less social implication, my reputational, but that sense of, who am I? Am I attuned to my own story?
Yeah.
Do I stand in my own reality, not my own reality, but in reality? Milton Friedman, mental health is a commitment to reality at all costs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Am I standing in the truth of reality? And from there, am I navigating these questions like, well, what do I do? Like, what is the positive if I do or if I don't, or the negative if I do or don't?
Yeah.
And like have it like that. That is foundation level, I think, because otherwise you see pastors, you see other leaders, right, who just follow the will of the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, and then it's about like, what can we incentivize people to think a specific way, irrespective of the consequence it has on the moral fabric of a country, the socioeconomic viability of a country, the congruence to the DNA, the ethos of something like a republic, a constitutional republic. I mean, we're seeing all these things. So it's familial, it's the church, it's business, it's political, kind of national level stuff, like all being driven by, I think, this same conversation.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
we're having.
I love what you said about the commitment to reality at all costs, and it brings me back to something you said a second ago about pastors being so depressed.
Yeah.
And then they pray that, take this evil spirit away from me and all this kind of stuff. It's like, but reality is telling you reality is you're depressed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a reason for that.
Yeah. That's good.
Like commit to reality, living in reality. Let your body tell you that there's a problem instead of trying to live in this alternative reality of what I want my experience to be, what I wish my experience would be, that I wouldn't be depressed, that I wouldn't be totally burnt out, that I wouldn't be completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You are burnout, you are depressed, you are totally overwhelmed.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about that?
Yeah, because everything that you've tried to do effectively has got you to this point.
Yes.
Not having boundaries, cowering to power brokers, trying to emulate the most popular guy who wears a leather jacket to preach in every Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, like whatever it might be, right?
skinny
Like
jeans.
it's what got you here, right? Because like in addiction recovery, my own best thinking got me here.
Yes.
If my own best pastoral imagination and living out what I thought that was supposed to be like got me here, I need to get honest with myself, attune myself to reality, and invite, you said earlier, invite relationship, invite a coach, invite an ally, invite someone to
And
help tear back the blinders and help me build a more sustainable model for caring for myself so I can care for the church.
And that is one of the first steps of differentiation, is doing that work.
Let me break in one more time and tell you about RedinkRevival.com, REDINK Revival.com. I want to encourage you to sign up for our blog e-newsletter there, as every month it will hit your inbox with a provocative blog post with topics about theology, biblical architecture for emotions, and how understanding the human brain is so helpful in giving more insights to various biblical texts. We also will feature updates on our monthly events to help you keep up on the ready for everything that is available to you. Also, I'd like to remind you, if this podcast is serving you with valuable insights, to subscribe to the podcast. If you think someone else would benefit from it, please review it, comment, and share it on your social media platforms. If your friends are privileged to know what's helping you, who knows what God might do in their life with the same resources. That would be a gift to us, and it would be a gift to all your friends. We're holding you in our hearts and believing God with you for a year of supernatural increase.
I think about the double bind thing and the way you described it. You're having people write down the two items, two options, the negatives and the negatives, what's going to happen here. It's interesting because when you have a double bind, when you have two options or all your options seem to be horrible, often that is fueled emotionally with generalized anxiety. It's, I have no idea what the enemy is here. I don't know where I exaggerate and catastrophize each of these options. So if you can pull the specificity of it into writing it down and write down each of the negative things and fully write it out, your brain then can assess the negative and say, okay, what would be the solutions that I now then can work through these negatives and find a preferred future as I navigate these less than desirable scenarios, but I know what the enemy is now, and your brain will calm, and then you won't be back into that depressive state. I think being able to write down what you're talking about, it causes the brain then to let go of all of this general, I got enemies everywhere, I don't even know where they are, they're lurking in the shadows, but if I write it down, I can see it clearly. Mm-hmm. Also, I want to pivot into the idea of, that you said a second ago about depression, because even the way that it can be talked about is that depression's the enemy. And it's like, no, depression's not the enemy. Mm-hmm. The enemy is something that is going on in your life that is disordered. You don't know what that is, and your body's telling you through the benefit of emotions like depression. So when you're feeling depressed, rather than make it the enemy and a demon of depression, ask yourself, what is it that went into the processes that brought me here? Yeah. And I think that's huge. So now then, let's go back to the original kind of construct that we started with. If a pastor or leader is feeling this, I'm in danger of harming you if I disagree with you, where is that line for which now I am able to serve you and give you the things that you need with kindness and graciousness? Of course, there's a difference in one-on-one and then being in the public forum. So if I am in the pulpit, that's more public. And so if I'm preaching and it hurts somebody and they say it hurts them, at what point do I take that on and I need to change that? Or at what point do I say, you need something more. I'm going to serve you in this season. At what point are you able to move in health there rather than being the victim to a world's opinion?
Yeah, that's the word that's kind of been in my brain the last 3 or 4 minutes. How do you pastor in a way that you're emotionally, spiritually, don't find an internal bind when someone says, you hurt me, that harms me.
Yeah.
I'm a victim, you victimized me is essentially the claim.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to be honest about the lack of differentiation in people's lives invariably leads to willingness to adopt victim stance, victim posture when it's convenient.
Yeah.
And some people get stuck there and they live there their entire lives. Mm-hmm. The power of the victim stance, and I think it even gets back to the authority dynamic that you talked about earlier. If I can't submit to authority, if I can't embrace the challenge and the healthy grind of that, where's resilience emerging from? Where does grit originate in our stories if it's not in that challenge? Healthy challenge, right? But it can't be challenge that's too weak. It can't be challenge that's overwhelming. But finding that space where responding to authority, having someone that we entrust ourselves to, a coach, a teacher, a pastor, an employer, right? That the strain of that, the healthy strain of that, brings about the best out of us.
Yeah.
But if we lack those formative experiences, right? I'm incapable. I'm going to go to victim status. You're asking too much of me.
Yeah.
Right? And if I'm undifferentiated, you're saying something that I don't know what to do with. Now you're hurting me.
Yeah.
Now I'm a victim. And if pastors are undifferentiated, right? Then I have to capitulate on my beliefs in an effort to care for you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we saw this happen a few years ago when a large church pastor got talked out of a theological foundation issue by his youth group.
Yeah.
About an emotional topic.
Yeah.
What happened to neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more.
Yeah.
Right? In John chapter 8, we see differentiation. Mm-hmm. We see a woman in pain. We see a crowd who's going to stone her. And we see Jesus who can empathize, connect, can attune, can relate, but he doesn't lose himself in the intensity of pain and in the judgment.
Yeah.
Doesn't lose himself in aligning with the power brokers.
Yeah.
He stays independent and invites us to embody that same posture as pastors and ministers, as leaders.
Yeah.
I see your pain. I honor your pain. Right? Here's how to live differently.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But I allow you the freedom. I'm not sending you away. I'm not dismissing you.
Yeah.
Right? Go and sin no more is not, right? I don't condemn you. You have the freedom to choose. Yeah. And my words of instruction, my words of affection for you are an invitation to let the interaction with me as your Lord and Savior change you.
Yeah.
Right? How can we as pastors step into that space of, I care for you.
Yeah.
Man, I just value your contribution. Those are hard questions. And right, the vocabulary at our church is, and this might be hard for some people, you can edit it out. Like, I dislike this. I'm challenged by this. I'm wrestling with this. This activates wounds for me. Here's my wounds.
Yeah.
We don't use like, I'm a victim. Like that language,
Yeah.
like it might be true, like you've been victimized.
Yeah.
But better language is, I'm wrestling with the pain of this. I've been hurt by, and to your point, the J.P. Moreland content you brought in a little bit ago, like let's explore pastorally the story beneath,
Yeah.
right? Because it's just the relationship, and it's the relationship with authority
Yeah.
that's activating that sense of weakness, that sense of insignificance, that sense of pain. So the pastoral relationship does hold a lot of potential for activating people's stories so that it can be corrective experience.
Yeah.
But that takes a sense of A, attunement,
Yeah. Yeah.
and B, differentiation
Come on, man.
on both parts,
Yeah.
right? For the pastor as leader to invite someone into that space of, I care about you. I want your good. I hear you. Like there's something here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think at the end of it, like this idea of deconstructivism, if we can go back to that construct, is 100% about authority.
Yeah.
We don't trust authority. We don't like authority. At every turn, we look to denigrate authority.
Yeah.
Police officers, pastoral moral failure, politicians. We're deconstructing, like, and at the same time, like we're lauding people who, right, like, are saying things our itching ears want to hear.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I don't want personal responsibility. I don't want to have to work for that. Like, where's that tipping point?
Yeah.
In the various examples you gave, and you brought back to Siegel's talk about attunement being so important as differentiation, I wonder if that's the missing piece. I wonder if that's the missing piece in so many of these stories and people's reaction to the authority, is the authority lacked the ability to be attuned. Let's take George Floyd.
Yeah.
The police officer, and I don't know all the details, but I'm assuming the police officer had a valid reason for trying to restrain him.
Yeah.
But he wasn't attuned.
Yeah.
He wasn't tuned to the man's experience.
Yeah.
A pastor has every right to teach theologically what he believes and what the church stands for.
Yeah.
But when we do that without attunement to what, there are people sitting in our congregation who are struggling with that thing that you're teaching on.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a level of attunement, the energy that comes out of you, the words that come out of you, the way it's presented is going to be in this unattuned way, which is going to make them feel like you don't get me, you don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that's a challenge, and it takes a lot of work. Like this is probably the reason why therapists, we say this is an incredibly hard job, and people who do our work, it's one of the hardest jobs because it requires that attunement hour after hour after hour, and it's exhausting.
Yes, absolutely.
It is exhausting. And so sometimes you just want to get up there and preach the theological perspective. This is truth. This is right, no matter what. And it does take a lot of work to be attuned. And I wonder if so many of the people that you just referenced being reactive to authority is because they never felt attuned to.
Yeah.
They never felt heard.
That's a good word. I think of one of them that I recently listened to. She had a guy who has a theology school, but posts some crazy stuff, fun stuff, but just memes and all that on his social feed. She invited him on her podcast. He comes on, and she is articulate, and she's, a beautiful human being, not just physically, but she's got a lot of, energy about her. And as she's telling that he has done things that are hurting people, and he needs to kind of stop. They're going back and forth, but he's being very gracious. She's being gracious, but she's pushing buttons. You can tell she's looking for him. And so I saw another YouTube that she had done called I Had an Abortion. And I thought, I wonder what that's about. So I listened to it, and the pain story in her church background it was enraging for me. I mean, it was a justice anger that I wanted to just, spiritually hold her in the way that she was hurt. And I thought, man, I wish that she could have been in a red ink retreat and could have felt the experience of being loved and seen. So many of those stories come from that. So yeah, the leadership wasn't attuned there. As we wrap this up, I do want to remind all of our listeners that we do at Red Ink Revival provide Zoom opportunities to walk this stuff out. So the attunement that somebody might be, I don't really have handles on what that is or what that looks like in my life. Differentiation, I don't know what that is. We help your leadership through engaging your stories. And we would love to go into a 6-week program with you in a group of 6 to 10 others. We have male pastors and female pastors or pastors' wives that are in individual groups, and it is a profoundly awakening experience for them. And so we want to walk hand in hand and help them make sense of that. And then, of course, we do retreats as well that we'll be putting on the calendar sooner than later. But I just want to say thank you guys for offering your kingdom gifts and letting us feel what you feel and learn from you. Your perspectives and language has benefited me incredibly. And so thank you for offering it to our Red Ink family.
Thank you. Yeah, always good to be here.